But underneath of it all, I was carrying something I hadn't really quite dealt with yet. A belief planted at 18 that I wasn't quite worth showing up for. I'd spent years believing the problem was me. Self-worth doesn't just affect how you feel, it directly affects your results. When your self-worth is shaky, you don't just end up in the wrong relationships by accident. You end up there by design. Every single one of those boys came crawling back. You make yourself indispensable because indispensable feels safer than simply being wanted. I had to completely rewire before I could see what was actually in front of me. Because somewhere deep in your subconscious is the belief that if I just try enough, if I just prove myself enough, I'll finally be worth staying for. The most loving relationship of my life, and I almost missed it entirely. You've built something, a business, a career, a life that looks from the outside like you've got it completely figured out. You know, you're capable, you're driven, and you're probably the person that everyone comes to when they need to get something done. And yet there's this quiet thing that's running underneath it all. In the relationships that keep going wrong in the same way, in the tendencies to give more than you receive and call it generosity, hello people pleaser, in the way you look in the mirror and immediately look for what's lacking rather than loving and celebrating what there is there. And that quiet little thing has a name, and today we're going to talk about it. Welcome back to P.S I Love Me. I'm Lynda Williams, your host and transformation coach, and I'm so glad you're here today. If you're new, hello, welcome. You've picked a good one to start with. P.S I Love Me is where we have the conversations that matter, about building a life you're genuinely proud of, about career success, about love and relationships, and about the thing that underpins all of those, the relationship you have with yourself. And that last one, that's exactly what today's episode is all about. Specifically, we're diving into self-worth. And I want to be clear from the start that I'm not talking about confidence or self-esteem. I'm talking about something quieter, deeper, and in my experience, far more powerful than either. Because that's the only way I know how to talk about this properly. So grab a coffee or a tea, put your earphones in, and let's get into it. So let me take you back, way back, before the coaching, before the business class seats, the luxury hotels, the award-winning PR agencies, before Singapore, before any of it. I grew up on a farm, a tiny village, the kind of upbringing where your nearest neighbour is a field away, and your fashion education consists entirely of leggings, a t-shirt and a wax jacket, and that was it, that was my wardrobe. And I showed up to secondary school completely clueless, and I got bullied for it. Not dramatically, but consistently chipping away. You know, that low-level cruelty that teenagers are so gifted at when they are working out their own insecurities and have approximately, zero emotional intelligence. And here's a funny thing. With my dodgy haircuts and dodgy dress sense, all the boys wanted to hang out with me. I was fun. I was up for anything. And I had the energy of someone who had spent her entire childhood outdoors with animals and zero screen time. Great company. Apparently terrible girlfriend material. Not one of them wanted to date me. Not one. Firmly in the mate zone. And then I discovered fashion. I moved away from the village, and about 5 years later, every single one of those boys came crawling back. Which, I will be pretty honest, was very satisfying. But here's what I didn't understand at the time. I'd spent years believing the problem was me, that there was something fundamentally unlovable about who I was as a person, when what had actually happened was that a group of insecure teenagers with zero emotional intelligence had responded to the surface level of me. My bad haircuts, my farm girl presentation, and I had made the mistake of confusing their reaction with the truth about my worth. Those were never the same thing, but I didn't know that yet. Now I want to share something even more personal, and I want to offer a brief trigger warning here because I'm going to talk about suicide. If that's not where you are today, feel free to skip forward about 2 minutes and I'll see you on the other side. When I was 18, my father died by suicide, and grief is such a beast of a thing to deal with at the best of times. But when a parent leaves this way, there's a particular kind of grief and sorrow and anguish that comes with it, because alongside the grief are the big questions, big, relentless, unanswerable questions. Why didn't they say? Was I not enough of a reason for them to stick around? Was I not reason enough? Was I not good enough? And then in the aftermath of his passing, I found out that he'd left everything to his friends, not his family, not me, not even a battered old watch I'd always associated with him. The one worth nothing and one meaning everything. It was as if that he thought about what and who mattered when he was making that will, and I simply hadn't made that list. I was 18 and I didn't know how to deal with any of this. So I did what most of us do. I brushed it under the carpet, picked myself up and kept moving, because that's what you do, isn't it? And move forward I did. I travelled the world twice over, first as a broke backpacker, living on next to nothing, saying yes to everything. And then years later in a completely different chapter, you know, the business class, the luxury flights, the super yachts, the amazing destinations, all as part of my work actually. I built a hospitality career, then I founded my own PR agency in Singapore, an award-winning one at that. I became, without false modesty, the go-to PR queen of Singapore. You know, on paper I was unstoppable. But underneath of it all, I was carrying something I hadn't really quite dealt with yet. A belief planted at 18 that I wasn't quite worth showing up for. Eventually in my late 20s, I got married. I chose someone solid and successful and serious, and I thought, right, I've cracked it. What I hadn't noticed, because I still hadn't dealt with that belief, was that I'd chosen someone who confirmed it. My ex-husband was more interested in his income and his gym routine than in the intimacy and connection of our relationship. And I was, without exaggeration, at the bottom of his to-do list. And yes, I stayed and I tried harder, because that's what you do when you don't fully believe you deserve better. You know, you overgive, you people please, you make yourself smaller, a bit easier, more accommodating, you start performing, doing anything you can to get the attention that you're craving. I was deeply unhappy, I was disconnected, and at the time I was 6 months into building my PR agency from scratch. Because, you know, I don't do things by halves. So there I was, launching a business with one hand and in the other making probably one of the hardest decisions of my life. And I left that marriage. And suddenly I was single in my mid-30s, thrown into a dating world, which I can quite tell you felt like an absolute disaster zone. And here's what baffled me. I was super capable at work, you know, I was well-travelled, award-winning woman of the world. But I kept attracting the same type of man. Emotionally unavailable, wonderful on the surface, but gone the moment anything real was required. It was my divorce, that moment of everything falling apart, that finally forced me to stop and have a look and to actually trace back the thread. And it led every time back to the two same things. A father who left this world without leaving so much as a watch for me, and an ex-husband who wasn't interested in investing in me or our relationship. Different men, same message. And I've been carrying that message deep in my subconscious since I was 18. Low self-worth was what had been running the show. Not bad luck, not the wrong men, though there were certainly a few of those. It was a story that I'd been carrying with me about what I thought I was worth. And until I did that work to change that story, I was going to keep living it out. So let's talk about what self-worth actually is, because it gets confused with two other things all the time, and I want to separate them properly so we get it. So confidence is your belief in your ability to do something, right? To perform, to deliver, to handle a situation, and it is contextual. So you can be super confident in your business and at work, but have zero confidence on your first date. So confidence is about what you can do. Now, self-esteem is how you evaluate yourself overall. It tends to go up when things are going well and down when they're not. And it's reactive. So it's how you feel about yourself on any given day. So it can vary from day to day. Now, self-worth is different from both of these things. It's not about what you can do, and it's not about how you feel today. It's actually a deep, often subconscious belief about what you deserve, what treatment you're entitled to, what you feel you're allowed to ask for, what you accept as normal. And it runs deeper than confidence, and it's more woven in than that self-esteem. And that's exactly what makes it so powerful and also so damaging when it's off. I like to think about it as like an operating system on your phone, right? Your iPhone. You never really think about it. It's just running in the background and everything else depends on it. And if there's something wrong at that level, it doesn't matter how many great apps you download, things just don't work the way that they should. So when self-worth has a fault line running through it, and honestly, for a lot of high-achieving women, it does, because of exactly the kind of experiences I just described, it doesn't stay contained to just one area of your life. It bleeds into your relationships, into your friendships, the decisions you make in business, all of it. If you love P.S I Love Me and truly want change in love and life, then join the Evolve Woman program, my 12-week online coaching journey, which will take you on a transformative experience of self-discovery to find the joy, connection, and deep love you so deserve. Just go to lindawilliamscoaching.com to find out more. Let's start with friendships, because this is where self-worth does some of its most under the radar work and where it's actually easiest to miss, because the behaviour looks so much like being just a really blooming good friend, right? So it can look like always being the one who reaches out, always being the one who makes the plans, absorbs all the drama and the toxicity and the complaints, shows up and rolls the sleeve up for every crisis. But actually you find it impossible to admit when you're struggling yourself, because asking for help and support can feel like you were being a bit of a burden. It looks like also tolerating friendships you know aren't good for you, because the thought of doing anything about it feels harder than just putting up with it. It also looks like being everyone's most dependable, most fun, most always there person, and yet feeling pretty lonely because the version of you that shows up is the overgiver, the always there for you, the always needed version, not the fallen, edited, sometimes struggling version of you. And real connection, the kind that actually fills you up, requires that second person, that second version. It requires you to be seen, and that is very hard to allow when you're not sure you're worth seeing. Now in business, and this is where I see it most clearly in the women I work with, self-worth doesn't just affect how you feel, it directly affects your results. It's why some brilliant women undercharge for their services. It's why you take on clients who drain you because saying no feels too risky. What if they don't come back? What if word gets out? It's why you wait to be approached rather than pitching. It's why you over-deliver constantly and perhaps under-communicate your value. And it's why you may say yes to things that aren't right for you because you're not quite sure you can afford to have standards yet. Not yet. When you've achieved a bit more, maybe. When you feel more established. When you feel more. When you feel enough. And here's the thing about high achievers specifically, and I say this with love because I am one. All that drive, all that pushing through, all that refusing to quit, brilliant, blooming brilliant, bravo. But if the reason underneath it is that you're not enough, rather than I love what I do, I know my value, you will keep achieving, but it will never feel like enough. You'll hit that next goal and immediately need to find another goal to hit, because you were never doing it from a place of worth. You were doing it to create some. And now, finally, I want to talk about love, the most important thing and why we're here today, because this is where self-love shows up most powerfully. And I think it deserves its own moment. When your self-worth is shaky, you don't just end up in the wrong relationships by accident. You end up there by design, your subconscious design. You find yourself drawn again and again to people who are just unavailable enough to keep trying. Because if you have to earn love, at least it feels like an achievement, something you've worked for, something that means something because it didn't come easy. And you minimise your needs early on because expressing a need, it feels risky, like you're going to get dumped just for having them. You overgive to feel secure. You make yourself indispensable because indispensable feels safer than simply being wanted. And when things get tricky, you work harder instead of asking the hard questions, because somewhere deep in your subconscious is the belief that if I just try enough, if I just prove myself enough, I'll finally be worth staying for. But here's the part that really gets me, and I say this because I lived it. The pattern doesn't just affect who you choose, it affects what you can even see. When someone genuinely loving and emotionally available does come along, your nervous system goes, oh, finally. But it also goes, oh, something's off. Calm might feel suspicious. Being consistent might feel a bit dull. Someone who is just kind to you, without the hot and cold, without the chase, without the drama, your body actually reads that as a lack of chemistry. When what you're really feeling is the absence of anxiety. And you've been so used to anxiety feeling like attraction that you literally can't tell the difference anymore. That is one of the most heartbreaking things I witness in high-achieving women. Emotionally intelligent, self-aware, incredibly capable in every area of their lives. And yet in love, they keep walking towards the fire and generally wondering why they keep getting burnt. It's not stupidity, it's not a weakness, it's a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. And I know this because I was that woman. I had to completely rewire my internal compass before I could even recognise the right person when he was standing right in front of me. And before I did that work, I would have walked right past him because he was steady, kind, emotionally available. And my wiring at the time read that as a lack of excitement. The most loving relationship of my life, and I almost missed it entirely. That is what self-worth work really does. It doesn't just change how you feel about yourself. It changes what you can see. It changes what feels safe. It changes what you're willing to accept. And it changes everything, and I really mean that. And I want to take a moment to zoom out here because I think it's really important that you hear this. What I've described is not a personal failing. The research on this is consistent and it does span decades. Across studies involving nearly 1 million people in 48 countries, men at every age report higher self-esteem and worth than women. And that gap is actually largest in the most gender equal, prosperous countries like ours in the UK. And UK research has found that nearly 80% of women report struggling with general self-esteem and worth, not occasionally, but as a consistent experience. And when it comes to something as practical as negotiating salary, women's top 3 feelings going in were a fear of rejection, lack of confidence, and worry about seeming too pushy. Men's top feelings? Feeling prepared, feeling confident, and believing that conversation will help their career. Same conversation, completely different internal experience. Why? Because from a very early age, girls are taught to connect their worth to connection, to being liked, to being needed, to being useful. And that has only got harder. Today's young women are growing up with a highlight reel of other people's lives in their pocket at any one time, being algorithmically rewarded for how people look and how many people engage with them. The external validation loop starts earlier and runs deeper than it ever has. And this is not a weakness in us, it's just a consequence. And it is completely, absolutely reversible. Which brings me to what actually shifts this, what moves the needle. Because I want to be honest with you, and it's not about affirmations, it's not a confidence course, it's not reading the right book on a Sunday afternoon, as much as I love a good book. For me, it meant going back and actually look at what had happened. You know, my father, the bullying, my marriage, the years of earning my place in rooms I was already entitled to be in. It meant getting honest about that pattern, not just acknowledging it existed, but really understanding where it had come from and why I had subconsciously kept recreating it. And here's what happened as a result of that work. I met my partner. And I want to be really specific about this because it matters. Before I had done that work, I wouldn't have given him a second glance. He was calm and steady and emotionally available and really kind. And my wiring still was programmed to read chaos as chemistry. Saw all of that and thought, lacks excitement, pass. That was the former me. I had to completely rewire before I could see what was actually in front of me. He is, as I describe him to anyone who will listen, my rock and my calm in the storm. I would have walked straight past him. And that's how much this work matters. So here are the 3 things I come back to, both in my own life and in working with clients, that generally do move the needle. Number 1 is your nervous system regulation. Yep. You cannot think your way out of patterns that live in your body. And I want to be really clear about this because I think it's the piece that most people skip. You know, they intellectualize it all, but it's actually the most important one. Your body knows the score long before your conscious mind has had a chance to catch up and figure out what's going on. Your nervous system has already clocked it, filed it away, and started responding based on everything it has ever experienced before, right? So when you've grown up in an environment where you felt love was uncertain, or where you learned that being needed was safer than being wanted, and then your nervous system got wired accordingly to that situation. And then you've got the deep-seated trauma, and I use that word carefully because trauma doesn't have to mean one big dramatic event. It can be actually years of accumulated smaller moments. And that trauma doesn't just live in your memories, it lives in your body, in your chest when you feel that familiar anxious feeling, and you pull towards someone who isn't good for you. In the way you freeze when you need to have a difficult conversation and say the tricky things. Or in the physical relief you feel when someone finally responds to your message. That is your nervous system, and it's not that logic. So regulation of your nervous system, it's not a nice to have. It isn't meditation as a treat. It's the work of literally rewiring your body to respond to safety, to love, and to unfamiliar feeling of actually being chosen. And to an unfamiliar feeling of actually being chosen. And it requires more than just thinking your way through it. It requires releasing what the body has been holding on to. So if you were operating from chronic stress, and honestly many high-achieving women are, your nervous system will keep choosing familiar over safe, no matter how much intellectually you know it's no good for you. Everything else builds on this foundation. Regulate your nervous system, number 1. Number 2, rebuilding that self-trust. So every single time you override your own instincts to keep the peace, to avoid a tricky situation or conversation, to make someone else feel more comfortable at your own expense, you're actually making a withdrawal from your self-trust account. And when that account gets to empty, you stop being able to trust your own read on situations, on people, on what's right for you. And rebuilding that, really start small, noticing what you actually feel and then actually acting on it. Even in the moments that don't feel super high stakes, because they often are little. So number 2, rebuilding that self-trust. Number 3, boundaries as self-respect. Not walls, not rules. Boundaries are simply that way of expressing what you value and what you will and won't compromise on. And that can be in your relationships, in your friendships, and in your business. They are how you show up in the world and yourself, what you believe you're worth. And they're one of the most powerful signals you can send down to your subconscious that things have changed. So these little subtle steps of making these little boundaries are what will make the difference in your subconscious. And I'll be doing a deeper dive into each of these in their own episode, so make sure you've subscribed and don't miss those. But before I close this episode today, I want to leave you with something to actually do, because I'm not a big fan of inspiration that doesn't go anywhere. This week, I just want you to notice one moment where you might override yourself. Where you say yes when you mean to say no, where you downplay a need, where you work harder to be liked instead of asking to be respected. Just notice it. You don't have to do anything dramatic. You don't have to suddenly become a boundary setting machine overnight. Just notice it and ask yourself, what would I do here if I genuinely believed I was enough? Not when I've achieved more, not when someone else validates me, right now as I am. And that question alone, asked honestly and regularly, often every day, is the beginning of everything. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Genuinely, it means everything that you're here. And I want to leave you with this. The most powerful thing a woman can do in a world that tells her to be smaller, quieter, and more grateful for less is to decide right now that she is already enough. Not when she's got smoother skin or thinner waist, or not when she finally has that director or VP in her job title, not when she earns more or when somebody finally chooses her. Right now, just as she is. And that is the work that does change everything. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it. Come and find me on Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm Lynda Williams on both, and tell me your aha moment from today. I genuinely read every message. And if you've not already subscribed to P.S I Love Me, please do. It means the world, and it means these conversations reach more people who need them. Leave a review if you're feeling generous. It just takes 2 minutes and makes a massive difference. I'll be back soon with more. Until then, take good care of yourself. You are worth it. Bye for now. That's it for today's episode of P.S I Love Me. I hope you've learned some interesting nuggets to weave into your everyday life to feel a little lighter, brighter, and inspired. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps more high-achieving women like yourselves to find us. And don't forget, wherever you are at in life, you are more than enough.